Curious about those once-beloved lunches that mysteriously faded from our family tables? Here's a lineup of 20 lunches that were once the centerpieces of our midday breaks. Let's see if these culinary classics are ready for a second serving. Introduced in the heyday of frozen TV dinners, chicken pot pie rose to fame in the 1950s when pre-made lunches were the new trend. Chicken pot pie was advertised as a convenient lunch that could feed a whole family without any culinary effort. It definitely helped that the pie was a marvel, taste-wise. Think of a flaky pastry crust filled with chicken, vegetables, and creamy sauce. If your mouth is watering right now, just imagine how attracted families were by this pre-made lunch. Chicken pot pie was a lunch classic in households by the late 1950s, with almost every house having it as lunch at least once a week. Alas, as most processed frozen foods have downfalls, chicken pot pie also lost its footing in the pre-made market. Items like Lunchables and frozen fried foods gained more traction through TV advertisements, and chicken pot pie was replaced on the lunch table. Macaroni and cheese with tuna emerged as another budget-friendly lunch that delivered a unique taste to people. Inspired by tuna noodle casseroles, this dish was a seafood take on the classic macaroni and cheese. All people had to do was buy cheap canned tuna from the market and combine it with homemade macaroni and cheese, and in a few minutes, you had a filling meal. Considering seafood prices were roaring during the early 1940s and 1950s, tuna macaroni and cheese was adopted by people as a favorable lunch alternative to seafood items restaurants were serving. Soon enough, lunch tables across the states were using canned tuna as the main protein that enhanced the taste of their macaroni and cheese. Eventually, the food started losing fans as fresh seafood became cheaper in the States due to increased production. This led to a negative impact on the sales of canned tuna, and so tuna macaroni and cheese vanished from family tables. Moving on, we have the green bean casserole, which makes for a healthy lunch that was often served at holiday dinner. As the name suggests, this dish was a casserole made with green beans, cream of mushroom soup, and a hearty topping of crispy fried onions. Green bean casserole's recipe emerged from the Campbell Soup Company in 1955, which had long been producing canned cream of mushroom soups. They introduced the recipe as a way to increase sales of their newest soup, and this strategy was an instant success. Nearly 40% of their soups were sold to create the green bean casserole in both homes and restaurants. The dish remained a part of Thanksgiving lunches for a long while, before eventually, households replaced it with a Thanksgiving casserole that had bits of everything we see on a Thanksgiving table. Fast food gained a lot of popularity in America during the 1940s, so it is not surprising that chili cheese dogs are next on our list. Hot dogs topped with homemade chili and melted cheese were sold at just about every roadside cart to people looking for a quick lunch. Best for workers who had short breaks, chili cheese dogs were the perfect balance of spices and flavors that would satisfy their hunger. In fact, the common man took such a liking to these hot dogs that several variations of a chili cheese dog recipe was released to the public in cooking sections of the daily newspaper. Soon after, chili cheese dogs were a comfort lunch served at family tables, with each house adding whichever toppings they preferred. You will not see this food served during family lunches anymore because hot dogs today are reduced to their value as being a roadside food. Going back to hearty lunch meals, pot roast is a family lunch that was made in homes using whichever ingredient was available at the time. Historically, pot roast can be traced back to Europe, where peasants and working-class homes regularly ate this lunch. Made using tougher cuts of meat and commonly available vegetables, America adopted this recipe as their own during the Great Depression. Economic perils allowed for pot roast to be a part of lunch tables, as people would use just about any vegetables and protein they could find. The most popular recipe was slow-cooked beef with carrots and potatoes topped with gravy. With the economic situation in the States improving, pot roast lost significant popularity amongst consumers as necessity was no longer something they had to factor into their cooking. When Spam was stocked up on the shelves of grocery stores, Americans used it to create their favorite lunch, a Spam sandwich. Spam, spicy and ham nicknamed thus, was sold as canned processed meat in markets where it found unprecedented success due to the great taste and cheap price tag. Eating processed meat on its own, however, was not as appealing as creating a sandwich was, and hence Spam sandwich was invented. People would either fry or grill Spam and sandwich it between bread with various condiments to ensure the lunch would not taste dry. Immediately, the masses took a liking to the cheap lunch. Just about anyone could cook up a Spam sandwich and please their stomachs during lunchtime. The sandwich remained popular until Spam started developing a bad reputation for having twice the amount of recommended fats for a healthy diet. This caused people to steer away from the processed meat. Continuing the trend of sandwiches, we bet you have never heard of a grilled peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Recognized to be a sandwich that emerged as a twist on the classic peanut butter and jelly, this is just one of the many variations of sweet lunches famous in America. Staying true to the name, you grilled your regular peanut butter and jelly sandwich to produce a warm, melted, and gooey sandwich. You cannot really go wrong with peanut butter and jelly as your main condiments, so the new version of this old sandwich gained popularity throughout many states. Coming across a grilled peanut butter and jelly sandwich nowadays is a rarity, as the sandwich's popularity decreased as a lunch item. This is due to how time-consuming grilling the sandwich was. Canned food was seemingly a fan favorite back in the day, as SpaghettiOs are the next forgotten lunch we want to bring back. Campbell's Soup Company took notice of the popularity pasta was gaining as a lunch food in the 1960s and invented SpaghettiOs. Sold for cheap in supermarkets, the dish was a basic tomato sauce with circular pasta rings instead of spaghetti noodles. SpaghettiOs were convenient and budget-friendly. Thus, they rapidly became a lunch staple for many people who needed a quick meal. Parents preferred giving their children SpaghettiOs because they were less messy, and children enjoyed the circular shape. Eventually, SpaghettiOs became a forgotten lunch as newer, easy-to-make lunches, like Kraft macaroni and spaghetti, came along. People simply did not enjoy the taste of canned spaghetti and moved on from the iconic SpaghettiOs. Corned beef hash with eggs was popularized in the States after World War II when rationing meat was a common practice. One of state's biggest food processing companies, the Hormel Company, claims they bought corned beef hash to America in the 1950s and jump-started the invention of corned beef hash recipes. Since acquiring fresh meat was getting harder in the post-war era, people used corned beef to create a hash lunch. The recipe was simple. All you had to do was dice corned beef, mix it with potatoes and onions, then add a poached or fried egg on top. Corned beef was not really a fan favorite, as the peculiar taste did not appeal to many people. This meant that as soon as necessity was not driving people's cooking, they forgot all about corned beef hash with eggs. Talking about rationed food, porcupine meatballs were a casserole dish that rose to fame during the Great Depression. Trust Americans to come up with creative recipes when times are rough, because porcupine meatballs appear to be tasty and interesting to look at. Made with ground beef shaped into meatballs mixed with rice and simmered in tomato sauce, the dish is named porcupine because the rice protrudes from the meatballs when cooked, resembling the quills of the animal. The use of basic ingredients like ground beef, long-grain rice, canned tomato soup, and onions made the dish cheap. With economic situations improving, people forgot about the woes of the Great Depression, which is one of the reasons why porcupine meatballs are a forgotten lunch today. You might be familiar with Bologna because of its popularity as a deli meat today, but fried Bologna sandwiches were in a league of their own back in the 1960s. Categorized as a Southern classic, fried Bologna sandwich was brought into the USA by German immigrants. The sandwich was mostly popular as a school lunch, as cafeterias would serve up hot fried Bologna slices on bread with cheese to students during lunch hour. While school lunches had a reputation for being average food, the fried Bologna sandwich was exempted from such notions. Children loved when fried Bologna was on the school cafeteria menu, and parents were happy that their children were finally content with their school lunches. Fried Bologna sandwiches remained a popular lunch choice until schools shifted to foods that could be cooked in batches instead of sandwiches that had to be individually assembled. Make way for more sandwiches, as sardine sandwiches are next on our list. A fairly easy lunch to cook up, sardine sandwiches used canned sardines that were mashed and mixed with mayonnaise or mustard to create a umami-flavored sandwich spread. Like we previously mentioned, seafood was getting expensive and families needed alternatives like canned fish to survive the lack of seafood options. Home chefs turned towards canned sardines to prepare a delicious sandwich with just a few ingredients that were laying around the house. Surprisingly, the sandwich was well received by the masses, and it became a go-to seafood food that you could cook up during family lunches. Unfortunately, sardine sandwiches suffered the same fate as tuna macaroni and cheese, as the prices of fresh fish decreased in the States due to increased fish farming, leading to tinned fish becoming less popular in homes. Our list of forgotten lunches would be incomplete without mentioning bean sandwiches. You may not have even heard of this vegetable-based take on sandwiches, but decades ago, bean sandwiches were part of many lunch tables. Home chefs preferred this healthy take on sandwiches even though cooking beans was a tedious task because you would end up with a flavorful and well-seasoned meal. According to the traditional recipe, the sandwich was cooked beans that were sometimes mashed and served on bread with toppings like vegetables and cheese. Like any other sandwich, the bean sandwich was highly customizable and satisfied just about anyone's cravings. If you had leftover beans from dinner, making a bean sandwich could be your best option. Since people were conscious of leftovers and wanted the most value out of all of their meals, bean sandwiches were a good way to utilize beans. Still, the combination was a little odd, and not a lot of states would pick up this lunch option. As meat delis opened up across the states, bean sandwiches were forgotten to be a thing of the past. Pickled pig feet might make you cringe right now, but they were quite the lunch in the southern USA. Simply put, the lunch was a plate full of pig feet that had been pickled in vinegar and spices. Some might have eaten pickled pig feet as part of larger meals like soups or stews, but it was not uncommon for people to snack on them as it is. Historically, pig's feet used to be considered an upper-class delicacy, but with the commercialization of processed food, pickled pig feet became available at local supermarkets. This opened the delicacy up to several people who had never thought of such a lunch existing. Though pig feet remained a staple lunch in southern states, it was inferred that the taste was not why people stocked up on the food, rather it was because they were sold for cheap in markets. Children definitely disliked the jelly-like vinegary taste, so it makes sense that the food started vanishing from shops during the 2000s as fewer people bought pickled pig feet. Similar to Spam sandwiches, fried luncheon meat sandwiches also used processed meat to create a comforting lunch. Luncheon meat was the name given to cold cuts of meat that included cooked, sliced, deli, and sandwich meats. During World War II, strict rationing of fresh meat prompted the population to find solace in luncheon meats. Necessity led to the creation of a sandwich made with fried slices of luncheon meat, topped with any vegetable or condiment available at the time. Luncheon meats had a long shelf life and required little to no cooking preparation, allowing people to conveniently assemble multiple sandwiches for lunch and keep their bellies full. Ultimately, the sandwich became a part of American cuisines and family diets, which allowed it to be popular even after meat rationing was reduced. Luncheon meat's fame declined only when health concerns were raised in regards to the sodium and fat content in processed meats. Bologna, like luncheon meat, was an affordable cold cut that America loved due to its affordability and customizability. Unlike boring sandwiches, bologna boats were a fun and appealing way to feed children during lunchtime, as the shape of bologna boats attracted younger audiences. What is so appealing about the shape, you might ask? Well, chefs hollowed out bologna slices and shaped them into an oval that would hold ingredients like cheese or relish. The slices were then baked to ensure bologna boats would hold their shape when being consumed. A fun addition lunch across the state eventually became a forgotten lunch, as the preparation time for bologna boats was too time-consuming. Home chefs needed a quick and suitable lunch to make, and bologna boats were not meeting the requirement anymore. Liverwurst and onion sandwiches were some of the least popular lunches introduced by local shops as a lunch option. Liverwurst was a variant of liver sausages that were cooked and paired with onions served on rye bread. Sounds unappealing, right? Well, that was the general consensus of everyone who ate this food in America. You would wonder why a simple 3-ingredient sandwich did not gain significant traction as a lunch staple, and the answer was easy. Liverwurst had a strong, overpowering taste that did not appease the taste palates of the common man. This was especially common in New York, where local delis started removing liverwurst sandwiches from their menu because of how disliked they were. Today, the sandwich is barely available in any state, and it would be rare to find a home chef cooking liverwurst sandwiches for their lunch tables. Yet another sandwich made using cold cuts were head cheese sandwiches. Where the sandwich originated from is unclear, however, food critics trace head cheese or meat jelly back to Europe. Beware, as this cold cut is made from unusual ingredients, including the flesh and meat from the heads of calves or pigs. Yes, that is where head cheese gets the name from. This cold cut is paired with mustard and pickles, then served cold on a slice of bread as a lunch food for those looking for an interesting sandwich. European immigrants brought head cheese with them to America, and much like the liverwurst sandwich, head cheese was not well received by locals. As the meat jelly was introduced in markets, many locals bought it as the price was economical, and they could try out a new dish. But the taste was so unlikable that people decided to not make this lunch a regular food, and head cheese was effectively forgotten. Yet another sandwich made using cold cuts were head cheese sandwiches. Where the sandwich originated from is unclear. However, food critics trace head cheese or meat jelly back to Europe. Beware, as this cold cut is made from unusual ingredients, including the flesh and meat from the heads of calves or pigs. Yes, that is where head cheese gets the name from. This cold cut is paired with mustard and pickles, then served cold on a slice of bread as a lunch food for those looking for an interesting sandwich. European immigrants brought head cheese with them to America, and much like the liverwurst sandwich, head cheese was not well received by locals. As the meat jelly was introduced in markets, many locals bought it as the price was economical and they could try out a new dish. But the taste was so unlikable that people decided to not make this lunch a regular food, and head cheese was effectively forgotten. Last on this list is the mutton leg, which was a common lunch food cooked on special occasions. Mutton has always been the least preferred meat choice in American cuisine, so it is no surprise that the food is now forgotten. However, there was a time when special occasions called for a roasted or braised mutton leg. Each chef had their pick of what spices they wanted to add to their mutton leg and what sides were to be served next to this piece of meat. Commonly, people would eat mutton leg with rice and potatoes, making for a flavorful yet heavy lunch. Today, mutton has largely disappeared from lunch tables owing to the lack of popularity amongst American chefs and the increased prices on mutton cuts. Did any of these dishes remind you of your childhood? If they did, give the video a like and subscribe.